welcome to Get in the Game. I am Brennan Barnard, your host, and I'm glad you could be here with us this evening to talk about being a recruited athlete. And if you're joining us, you probably believe that that has value. So hopefully we're starting from that same point. It can be a chance to continue something you love, a sport that you love. It can also be something that helps kind of form your search and your application experience. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the how, the what, the why, the where, the when. And we want to start with kind of that idea of why, right? What's your motivation for being a student athlete? What does it mean to be recruited? Where might you start to look, and what division? How are you going to go about it? And then, of course, when to start. And so to help us unpack that all this evening, excuse me, we have Drew Granucci, who is, there we go. How about that, Drew? The Huskies.
Very nice.
Associate Admission Director at the University of Connecticut, home of the current men's basketball Division I national champions. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And with us also is Sue Willard. There we go, Sue, who is the Senior Associate Director of Admission at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And the Statesmen compete in Division III, except for lacrosse, where they're Division I. And in fact, they are the Statesmen were the Division III national NCAA hockey champions this year. So it's exciting. Also, Sue was a recruited athlete herself, played soccer at Hobart and William Smith, and coached Division I and Division III level soccer. So we have great wisdom with us tonight. We're going to be using the Q&A display on Zoom. So please go in there and ask your questions. We also had a lot come in during registration, so we'll get to those. And we're also going to be using the chat function. And so just to begin with, I have a little quiz for you. And so go in the chat, and I want you to guess, or maybe you just know, don't Google it, what % of high school athletes receive athletic scholarships? So what % of all high school athletes who go on to college receive athletic scholarships? All right, we have some guesses. 12, 1, 1, 3, 8, 20. I mean, they're coming in fast. 0.5, 1%, 2, 13, 10, 5, 5. Okay, so the answer is around 2%, and very few of those get full rides. So we can start from that place. And the second question is, what % of college athletes, so students who actually go play in college, will go pro in their chosen sport? So of all those college athletes, what % will go pro? And we're getting some 15%, some 0.01%, all over the board. So the answer is also just less than 2%. So that kind of sets the stage a little for recruiting. And Drew, maybe I'll start with you. Can you paint us a picture of your applicant pool at UConn, of the students who express interest in your school? What percentage come in kind of wanting to play competitive athlete or competitive sports, and how's that kind of unfold throughout the process?
Sure, absolutely. So we received a record number of applications this year, as we have for the past several years, about 48,000 in total. And out of those 48,000, there's only just over 200 that are recruited athletes. So it's a very small percentage of the applicant pool. It ends up being a very small percentage of the overall student body as well. And while there may be many students who are interested in playing sports and perhaps end up on a club team or intramural level, really for us and most Division I schools, a lot of the recruitment process with the coaching staffs has already happened before they get to the application process. It starts very early on in high school and continues throughout their high school career. So it's a small percentage of most D1 schools that are the size of UConn or even larger.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's probably just the nature of being a D1 school. There are not a lot of students who are coming in saying, well, maybe I'll play, maybe I won't play, right? They're kind of either in one camp or the other. And we can
they've made that decision.
Yeah. And we can talk a little later about kind of the sports culture and how many are drawn by that and kind of the big school spirit. Sue, how about in your applicant pool? What what do things look like at this year?
So just like UConn, we were fortunate enough to have our highest application total ever this year. I mean, I think students are applying to more colleges than ever before. Our applicant pool is a little different with the number of student athletes that make up our applicant pool, so or our incoming class. So we have about 35%, 35 to 40% of our incoming class are going to be student athletes here at HWS. And there is a higher proportion of student athletes that do enroll under early decision. I think student athletes, their college process can start a little bit earlier, especially if you're looking to play higher level Division III athletics. So, you're visiting schools and talking to coaches earlier in your junior year in your process, you visit those schools. So, there isn't any difference in admission standards for athletes and non-student athletes, but there are a larger portion of our student body who are athletes, just because Division III is about having that experience, giving that opportunity. So that's where we are right now with that. But like I said, it is more heavily geared towards our early decision and early decision 2 round, early decision 1 and early decision 2 with when our student athletes enroll. But it is around that 35-40% of our incoming class usually are student athletes.
Thanks. And excuse me, just to stay with you for a second, what, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a college applicant, right, a prospective student applicant, how should they be thinking about college sports as they start their college search and selection? So, a lot of rising seniors right now, and maybe even rising juniors, are thinking, okay, what role, maybe even earlier, what role is sports going to play in my search? What should they be thinking about?
I think that question right there is what students need to ask themselves. What role do they want athletics to play in their search? And I'm going to be honest, not every high school athlete is a college athlete. And, that's a really difficult conversation to have. It's a difficult realization to have, because athletes love being part of a team and they, want to maybe continue that at the college level. But I think they want to ask themselves, what role do they want that sport or to play in their experience? Do they want it to be more of a full-time job? At Division I and Division II, it's more of a full-time job. You don't have the opportunity to do some of those extracurricular activities that your peers might, with study abroad, with potentially some internships or research opportunities, with clubs, those types of things. Whereas in Division III, there's different types of Division III institutions. My first position out of here, it was a brand new Division III team, and the level of commitment that those student athletes had to commit to our team was a little different than what I had to commit to my team, which was a higher level team. So it really depends. If they want to be part of a sport but not commit 6 days a week, almost all academic year, including lifting, training, all of that, and travel, then maybe club sports is a better option for them, or intramural sports. But I think, like I said, there's two things. What role do you want it to play? What other things do you want to have as part of your experience outside of the academic and athletic piece, if that happens? And also, are they really a college athlete? And you have to ask a lot of people to really determine if you are. And if you're a low level one, then there's certain schools that might be a fit for you. But just because you're an athlete doesn't mean that, college athletics is going to be in your future.
Well, and on that note, I want to ask the audience again, and go ahead and put it in the chat. What sport, if you're a student or you're a parent, what sport you're considering, and what division are you thinking about? Just put that in the chat, just so we have a sense for kind of where people are coming from. And we have everything from basketball to softball to crew at D1 and D3, wrestling, just pretty much covers volleyball, football, baseball, just covering everything. So, Drew, what, for student athletes, what are things they should be considering? And Stu talked a little bit about it, but about division level and how that reflects their ability and desire to play. How do they go about thinking about D1 versus D2 or 3?
Absolutely. Well, I think Sue brought up a lot of good points. Certainly the hour commitment and how big a part of your life you want it to be, because that's going to, if you look at some of the surveys of athletes on the D1, D2, D3 levels, that is a key difference. Another thing to consider is the travel involved, the time away from campus, and how that might impact your academic experience. At UConn, for example, we're in a conference with opponents across the nation. So our student athletes do travel during the season several days a week. If you're on a D2, D3 level, you might have more local opponents. You might be taking more bus trips kind of back and forth. So definitely commitment level, the time involved, and the off season as well, I think is a difference. Our athletes at UConn are really involved year round. They're on campus during the summers. They're really heavily involved in the athletic sphere. So those are some of the factors to consider.
That's helpful. Thanks. And Sue, to follow that up, HWS offers both D1 and D3, as we talked about. How does the admission process and ultimately the college experience look different depending on that, how they're applying, which
Yeah.
applying to?
I'd actually like to add one other thing to what I was saying before. I also think people need to ask themselves, what role do they want to play on a team? Okay, so when you're looking at that is, are you willing to be a bench player probably for the majority of your college career? Or do you want that person that has more of an opportunity to play earlier on? So it was always conversations I had as a coach, and it's a hard pill to swallow. So what role do you want to take? So looking at the difference between the Division I experience and Division III experience at our school, I think it really has to do with time commitment. And the application process here, because we are predominantly Division III school, is the same for our Division I men's lacrosse team as it is for all of our Division III sports. But our Division I men's lacrosse team, they are training and competing for a larger portion of the year. So in Division I, you're going to have more hours per week that the coaching staff can require of you. So that includes lifts, it includes travel, it includes an off season that is significantly longer than in Division III. So the rules changed a little bit during COVID for a non-traditional, so the non-competition season for Division III sports. So you're going to have your competitive season, which is longer in Division I. So for example, our men's lacrosse team will train in the fall, and they'll train for more weeks than our Division III women's lacrosse team. So they'll start, towards the beginning of the fall semester, and they'll end probably, not far from or long before Thanksgiving, and then they'll come back in early January, whereas our women's lacrosse team won't come back until the normal time, and they'll start training probably 2 or 3 weeks later than our men's lacrosse team. That's just kind of a guesstimate. But I think the biggest difference is the amount of time that Division I student athletes have to commit to their sport versus Division III student athletes, because Division III is all about offering more balance. So that's a big question you need to ask yourself, and it is a huge commitment.
Thanks. Drew, there was a question that came in about the idea of walking on to a D1 program versus playing at the D3 level. Any thoughts on that and how likely that is and how that works?
It's actually very competitive in a similar way to being a recruited athlete. It's not open to everyone to decide to walk on to a team. Most of our walk-ons at UConn and I assume for many large D1 schools are going to be a part of that recruitment process as well. But when it comes down to it, working with the coaches, they may say, we don't have a scholarship to offer, but they're still kind of in that recruitment process. So it's typically not a student who's deciding once they get to UConn, hey, I want to play basketball or I want to swim or whatever the sport may be.
Right. And again, all of this goes with the caveat that it depends, right? It depends on yes. what division, but also what league a school's playing in and how competitive it is and what sport, right? Because it might be easier to walk on to a rowing program, a crew, and it might be a football team or basketball team or, something like that. Let's get into the admission process a little and how it influences the admission process or how it kind of goes with it. Sue, how much influence does a coach have on the admissions decisions? I know you said that the standards aren't different for athletes, but can you talk a little bit about that role?
Sure. So first and foremost, for a student, regardless of whether it's UConn, whether it's Hobart, William Smith, or any other college or university, a student needs to be academically eligible to be admitted, regardless of how strong they are in whatever sport they compete. And when I say that, does this student have the academic preparation and skills to be successful academically at our institution? Because if they can't do the work academically, they're not going to be competing in whatever sport it is. So I'm not going to lie, coaches do have some influence on the admissions process. They are not going to get a student in. But when I'm looking at it, if it's a borderline student academically, but they're a quality character and they have things to offer our colleges beyond their athletic ability, I'm thinking, okay, well, coach is going to be looking over them, watching over them, making sure that they're taking care of what they need to take care of. We don't have slots. I know some schools might have slots where a coach can say, okay, I have these 3 students that, I really want on my team. Some of them have more of an academic index where they have to maintain a certain GPA, those types of things. But I know in Division 3, you are a student. We might get into academic reads, admissibility reads later on, but students at the Division 3 level should interact with admissions just like regular students. Okay. Coaches will advocate for them. They will beg and plead for certain students. They will sing your praises. And it's always good to have people in your corner, whether it's a coach, whether it's a professor, whether it's some sort of alum. It's just another person speaking on your behalf. But, for the vast majority of schools, coaches will not get a student into a school, but it might enhance their ability and speak to your quality of character and what you would bring to a campus more than an application could capture.
Thanks. And it's like you said, it's nuanced. At some schools, there are kind of more spots that coaches have, and the process really differs by school and by sport. And so students should be able to, and families should be able to ask and get straight answers about how that works at that school.
Yeah, in some schools, I mean, athletics, people might think, oh my gosh, 35 to 40% of your student body are student athletes. I mean, we're a smaller school and it's not crazy. And those student athletes are doing other things. But at the same time, some schools could be using athletics as a form of a way to enhance their enrollment numbers. So it really does depend. And that's something that all students and families should get used to hearing in this process of it depends. So every school is individual. I cringe when people say, oh, that person just got into that school because they're an athlete, because they didn't. It's very rare that just athletics gets a person into a school, because if they don't have the quality character, the ability to be successful academically, they will not be admitted into a school, because coaches are coaches. And admissions is admissions. We are the ones that make the decision about, being able to be admitted into an institution. A coach is the one that determines whether they're going to compete in whatever sport or team that they would like to compete for.
Thanks. I really like that, how you draw out the character piece of that, because yes, the academics need to be there. The athletic prowess needs to be there and accomplishments, but the character of an athlete can really make or break a decision, right? From the very beginning of the recruiting process straight through. And so I think that's really important to kind of hit home with students. And Drew, maybe I'll just turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about the pre-read process? And there's a lot of questions that came in registration about what a pre-read is. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So for pre-read, for us, that's traditionally going to happen during the senior year. So slightly earlier than perhaps our regular applicant or a full applicant pool. But what we're really doing there, viewing as much information as we have at that point. So transcripts are submitted and we may have some additional information about the applicant. And we're going through that holistic review process as we do for all of our other applicants, and giving an indication of where we think that student might fall at that point in time. But all of our admissions decisions go out at the same time, at the same day at UConn. And so that student does not receive any guarantee. There's no pre-admission per se. It's simply a kind of review of the applicant and giving the NCAA compliance office as well as the coaching staff an idea of where they fall in our applicant pool.
Thanks. And Sue, when does that process happen, the pre-read process for you all at HWS?
It depends on the sport. Some teams are a little earlier on the process, like men's lacrosse might bring in something a little bit earlier. say junior year, because a lot of those Division I athletes will have committed a verbal commitment to a school their junior year. Some of our higher level Division III sports, they'll start asking for those academic reads during a student's junior year. Ideally, we'd like to have 3 full years of high school grades and classes to examine before, we tell a coach, yes, the student's a competitive person for admission, or, they're challenged, in the admissions process, might not be admissible, those types of things. But, we want to have as much academic information on the student as possible. But generally, it's the summer before a student's senior year, in the fall of a student's senior year.
Well, you brought up another good point, which is this idea of verbally committing to a school. And there was a question in the chat, the Q&A here. If a student is verbally committed to a school, what's that really mean? Can either party change their mind at any time without penalty?
It's a pinky swear.
Yes, yes, they can.
Yeah. So, Drew, do you want to take that? I think it's different in Division I or Division III. I mean, I'm happy to pick up where you leave off.
Yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about, in addition to verbally committing, the idea of a signed letter of intent.
Sure. So absolutely. Verbal commitment is simply that. It's a verbal commitment, but there is nothing in writing at that point, and both sides can easily decide to uncommit, and that happens. A national letter of intent is a little bit of a stronger commitment. You're signing with the school, and technically you do have to be released from that letter by the school if you decide to reopen your recruitment process, which can happen as well. So nothing's ever final really until they're on campus and with the team, but generally that's how it works with a verbal commitment versus a signed letter.
Thanks.
And Division III, it's a little different. Students who say, "Oh, I committed to Hobart William Smith," and they might, it's just a verbal commitment. So we're having students do that now who have come up to visit, and coaches said, "Yes, we want you on our team." And there's also the financial piece too. So there are financial estimates that we can do for students, and I usually, if it's a student I'm working with and a team I'm working with, I'll look it over and tell coach, yep, this is a strong candidate. I will never tell a coach that, yes, the student's going to be admitted, because we still need to get that application. And there might be things in that application that could cause us pause. So a verbal commitment is just that. It's a verbal commitment and saying, yes, I want to be there. But until, at least at the Division III level, until you have that offer of admission from admissions, you have an offer of financial assistance from the financial aid office, that's when things become official. And to commit to a school, it's when you pay the deposit at Division III. But a verbal commitment is just saying, yes, this is where I want to go if everything works out. And you tend to pull back from those other schools that you're looking at. So coach knows, okay, this person's coming. I have my center midfielder. I'm good. I can back off some of the other student athletes that I'm recruiting, because they don't want to over recruit and they don't want to promise something to someone that isn't the case.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of early decision and in recruited athletes, Sue, and maybe how that, I think sometimes people think if I'm getting a pre-read and I get kind of vetted through a pre-read, that means I have to apply early decision. Can you talk a little bit about that?
First of all, it's Division III. We're not giving you an athletic scholarship. You are not signing a national letter of intent. It is Division III. Drew at UConn is a little different because there are many more caveats at Division I. So a student should apply early decision at the Division III level if they know that school, that athletic team is where they want to be with 100% of their heart, mind, body, all of that. Okay. If it's not, then you should not apply early decision to that college or university, knowing that if I don't apply early decision, maybe that spot on the team isn't going to be available to me. Okay. But Division III is about the whole experience. If you're not 100% set on that school, then you should not apply there. Some coaches do try to force students' hands and say, if you don't apply early decision, we don't want you. Okay. Or you're not going to have a place on our team. And they do that because they want to shore up the best class that they can have. And early decision is binding. Okay. And that's why they want you to apply early decision, because you can't apply to any other schools after that. But I can't emphasize this enough. You need to make sure when you apply early decision, it's because that's where you want to be. It's not because that's the only time that you can apply and have a chance on that team that you might want to be part of. Okay. So it's a very important process. Take the time you need.
Yeah. Thank you. So Drew, I want to kind of shift a little because there's some questions that came in around graduation and retention rates for and kind of academic support for student athletes, and how that might look different, and especially at a D1 program, and maybe then Sue, you could follow up if how those kind of supports might look different playing a D3 sport or playing a D1 sport at a predominantly D3 school.
So traditionally, and there's NCAA statistics that kind of bear this out, student athletes who are playing varsity sports tend to graduate actually at higher rates. They tend to retain at higher rates because of the support that is offered to students. It's a very structured environment for counseling, for academic advising, for when you're doing study hall, and there's someone who's very much on top of your academic progress. So there tends to be higher graduation and retention rates overall for student athletes that are playing on the varsity level.
Thanks. Stu, anything to add to that?
I would also say that student athletes tend to have the highest GPAs on campus as well, because you have to be so structured, at least at the Division III level. I've worked at some very highly selective institutions as a coach, and you have to be so structured with what you do and how you do your work. So I think, you have a higher GPA for many student athletes, but also in terms of retention rate, when you see students leaving schools, it might be because they didn't put that time into the recruiting process, and they're leaving because, they chose a school for the wrong reason. Maybe they chose a school just for the sport team. And it's not a fit for them. They don't have the opportunity. That's when we usually see student athletes leaving the school and transferring to another one. And that's why I'm saying, take the time, especially, with Division III, where there aren't scholarships, so on and so forth, athletic scholarships, I should say. That's when you usually see students leaving. But a lot of athletes, you're driven, you're competitive, you want to be the best you can be. And you have lots, as Drew said, a lot of support systems in place to help you if you are struggling.
Well, you are just full of good segues tonight, because Drew, I want to take what she said and build on it a little around the transfer issue, because there's some questions about the transfer portal and what impact you might have seen that have on first year student athlete recruitment, and maybe you could just give us a quick understanding of what the transfer portal is.
Sure. So I think that is something that continues to evolve. We're learning more about this process, year by year, day by day, really. The transfer portal, a lot of the rules around transferring have changed over the last several years. So we're continuing to evolve and see the effects of that. And we do see many more recruited athletes now come through the transfer portal as opposed to the first year admissions process. So that continues to be an evolving thing. And at UConn, you'll see teams made up of a combination of recruited first year students and transfer students, and it's becoming more common to transfer out if you're not getting the playing time you want, or perhaps you're not agreeing with the coaching staff. So that's something that I think all of us are looking at and seeing how that impacts the student athlete experience. But it's very much a reality now, so it's important to consider that as you're going through this process.
Yeah, and how that plays out for younger students who are just entering the recruiting process and all of that. Sue, there's a question here about services like NCSA and whether or not they're these programs that help students with recruiting in high school, that paid services that will help you with your profile and everything like that. Any sense, Sue, on kind of are they worth the money?
I'm not going to say don't do. I'm not going to say don't do it, but I would always tell students the most important thing is reaching out to the coaches on your own. When I was a coach, I used to get those, and it was like getting the mass email, that you have now advertising this and that. That's what it was like, and it was just clicking through. I think the personal communication you have with the coaches, and I would encourage the students to do this, not the parents to be the initial outreach. Invest in a good video of, if you're a soccer player, basketball player, football player. I think video is very important because you can email that YouTube link or whatever it is to a coaching staff and they can see if you're a good fit for the program. Let's be honest, college is expensive. And if you want to make an investment in something, Division III athletics, you're not going to get an athletic scholarship. Okay. And if you can take, I don't know how much the recruiting services are. If you can take the amount of money that you're spending on that recruiting service and invest that in tuition and room and board and fees, I think that that's a really good investment. However, international student athletes using one of those recruiting agencies or agents could be a really valuable tool just because this process here in the States is much different than everywhere else across the world. But I think domestically, more students are noticed through the tournaments that you play, through the clinics that you take part in, through reaching out to a coach and saying, "Hi, I'm Sue. I'm a soccer player. This is who I am. Can you come watch me play? Are you interested in seeing me play?"
Being a self-advocate and doing some of that.
Yep.
And working with your coach, whether it's a club coach or a high school coach, to help get some highlight video and things like that. Are either of you familiar with Recruit Spot? Okay, there's a question here about Recruit Spot, which was a kind of a common app type platform for recruited athletes, and whether there's movement on that. But we'll pass on that one since I don't have any current information on that either. Sue mentioned, Drew, about the kind of communication with coaches, right? So when should that start? How active should students be in doing that? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I would recommend to begin thinking about that definitely early on in the high school career for a lot of our teams that are more competitive. If you go to most athletic websites, you'll be able to find the coaching staff, their contact information. Many of our teams, for example, will have a recruitment coordinator, and that's a good person to start with to, again, begin to engage with the coaching staff and through the process. And the other aspect is you can begin working with the NCAA Eligibility Center. You can register for an account with them. And there's some great guides that the NCAA puts out about kind of timeline and what you can be thinking about each year to help you step through that process. But that's similar to what Sue has said. That's always a good place to start, is with the coaching staff. Before you get to us, you're typically going to be on their radar if they are interested in recruiting you.
Right. And Sue, how would you recommend that students really start to get an idea for the program? For, every program is unique, and how can they figure out if they're a good fit for that coach and that program?
Yeah, so I think it's and to go on what Drew was saying, I would also recommend students and their families look on the NCAA, where there's a great website and resources to know what the rules are. So as you start the recruiting process, before you start reaching out to coaches, even understand what the rules are, when they can communicate with you, when you can communicate with them, when you can visit, so on and so forth. But I think, how if you're a fit for the program, whatever it may be, if you're an individual sport athlete, so if you're a runner, if you are a swimmer, where times and different distances are very, the ability to compare the results of that college team and see, okay, well, I swim the 50 freestyle. Let's see what the times are of the students that are on that team. Let's see where mine are, so we can see kind of the comparison. If it's a team sport, you might be a great player at that position, but depending on the style of play of that team, depending on what the coaching staff needs, if you're a football player and you're a quarterback, you're a good quarterback, but that team already has 5 quarterbacks, and there's a senior, there's a junior, there's a couple first years. Just because you're a great quarterback doesn't mean there's going to be a spot on the team, because coaches need to make sure that they don't over recruit for certain positions. So I think it is going on and seeing, watching them play, see what level they are finishing up at a season. How are they competing against peer schools? talk to them at clinics, talk to your coaching staff. They're going to know, like, look at students that you might have competed against at the high school level, at the club level. Where are they playing? How are they doing? Are they on the bench? Are they getting a lot of playing time? Those types of things. I think you can kind of, social media is great. You can connect with people. You can see, even if you don't know the person they compete against, like, you can see, okay, I remember defending that person. So they're playing at this school. Let's see if they're getting any playing time. How are the results? So there's lots of ways. Some schools Google, give me the best basketball teams in the country. Okay, you can do that and you can contact them. But, Drew, I'm shocked that you don't have a men's basketball team made up of walk-ons. So, it's one of those things where you can do the dirty work. You can talk to your coaches and see, how is that program? Do you think I can play for that program? See, like I said, what your peers are doing at the colleges and universities they're competing for. If it's an individual sport, if it's tennis, something like that, where you can go on rankings, just see where you fall. In those things. Like our swimming coach used to be hilarious. Our old swimming coach, she would say, is this a shark or is it a floater? So you can kind of tell by your times.
Love that. I was a floater.
Same with me. I love the water, but I am not a shark by any means.
I was a floater if I was lucky, if not a sinker. I think it's really important to think about, like, what's the experience you want to have, not just on the team, but at the school. And do you want to be at a school that has where students are attending all the games in your sport, especially? And I mean, what's the culture you're looking for, and what's the experience you're looking for? I think those are really, really important things to start to dig into. Let's see, here we go. Can you talk about, Drew, anything about the NIL and name, image, and likeness legislation, and kind of how that's impacted recruitments and who attends and transfers?
Sure. So name, image, and likeness, it's, again, one of those topics that is relatively new. And I think we're continuing to learn about it and see how it's impacting our student athletes. But there are some student athletes who are getting a lot of headlines that are doing quite well with NIL. But I think if you look at a lot of the statistics, and as the dust kind of settles around NIL, it's actually not as large of an impact monetarily as some might expect for the vast majority of athletes. So it's a very small percentage that is going to college and making hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that you might see some headlines about. So it's important to think about and perhaps consider, but generally the money is going to be there for a very small percentage of student athletes.
Okay, thanks. Speaking of money, there's a question here, Sue, for you. Maybe if you could talk briefly about how financial aid plays in the pre-read process in D3. Do schools provide a reasonably reliable estimate of aid and costs as part of the process? You spoke a little bit about that earlier, but can you just kind of touch on, in your experience, how when other scholarships and non-need-based aid that might be offered and all that, how's that? Is it a good estimate up front?
Yeah, I think every school depends. With us, we do our estimates. We require academic information from the student, so we can do the academic evaluation to see about any merit scholarships. And then we require the FAFSA of domestic students. We require the CSS profile of international students. Every school is going to require some sort of financial materials depending on what they use. So we'll do a very personalized one, and we don't have a different financial model for student athletes. We use the same model for student athletes and general students. There are sometimes incentives to applying early decision financially for, athletes and non-athletes. It doesn't matter. You're treated the same way. So our estimates are very accurate as long as all of the information provided to us is accurate. But I think it's very important for families to know that the paperwork says, what you're able, to afford. And sometimes financial packages, it's a difference of, what do you want and what does the paperwork say you need? So doing estimates is very important because you shouldn't apply to a school if you don't understand the early decision, that is. If you don't understand potential affordability, all schools have a net price calculator, which you can do from the comfort of your own home. It might not be as accurate as a financial estimate a school processes for you, because they're going to be using more information. But I would recommend anyone who is applying early decision, and finances are a significant portion of your decision-making process, to talk to, the coach and the admissions and financial aid office at that school, and see if they do offer financial estimates. Everyone should know that those might be a little delayed this year because there is a new FAFSA coming in. And I think all colleges and universities are kind of navigating through that process, and seeing how we want to handle that. But I think it's very appropriate to have a discussion about a financial estimate, because if you can't afford a school, it's not the right school for you.
Well said. Well said. So we're going to wrap up here in just a second, but I want to ask you both a question, and maybe you can just reflect on kind of, for students going into their summer, right? What are the 2 to 3 things you would say a student athlete should be doing this summer to kind of move the ball down the road, or ball down the field, I guess? And Drew, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think, depending on your sport and where you are with your season, definitely spending time enjoying that sport and being a part of your athletic season is very important to continue your training and working towards your goals in that area. But I think if you're in the later stages of the process, beginning to think about what the actual application process is, how you can work towards those goals during your summer and get a leg up on things. Because if you're playing a fall sport or you're involved in a season, you all know that your life is going to get very busy once you head back to school. So being able to work on some of those things like the essay or beginning to fill out the application can really give you a good start on the process. But generally, it's the summer. I think enjoy yourself, have fun. It's a time to not put too much stress or pressure on yourself.
What a novel idea. I like that, though. I like it. Sue, what do you think? And maybe
Drew stole my thunder. It's going to say one.
And Sue, maybe as you reflect on that, maybe you could also just share, you were a recruited athlete, a student athlete. If you were to go back and do this over and approach the admission process as a student athlete, what would you do differently?
First of all, I'm going to say really important. I think Drew is spot on of you need to make sure you have balance. It is stressful being a student athlete, and you have one body, and that body takes wear and tear. I am astounded by students that can play 2 90-minute soccer games at a tournament. So I think you need to take, if I'm looking back at myself in high school and going through this process, and as when I was a coach for 11 years, I think the advice I would say is, give myself some rest, give myself a mental break so I can just shut it off and be a normal person, not Soccer Sue. So shut it off, let my body recover, because I've seen a lot of wear and tear on students. I would also look back and just say, control what you can control. Okay, you can control your fitness. First and foremost, that's what you need. You need to be fit. If you're not fit, you're going to be injured. Control what you can control in terms of being more active in the process of looking at schools. Okay, you're the one attending whatever college or university. You're the one that's potentially being a student athlete. So this needs to be your decision. And as scary as it is with me, I was trying to avoid the situation. So take the time, pace yourself, and really ask yourself those hard questions and have those hard conversations with, your family. And it's okay, I really don't want to do this, or I really do want to do this. And let's have a discussion about affordability. Let's have a discussion about, how we can support each other through this process. So I think that was I was very fortunate because my parents were great in this process, and they knew how to kind of slow play me. And they also knew how to give me a nice kick in the tush when I needed it. But I think it's very important for students to control what they can control. As Drew was saying, get ahead on the application, understand the rules. Do your homework basically, and make sure you're not trying to play a game with coaches and saying the same thing to every coach, because college athletics is a small world. When I was sitting on those fields watching games, we'd say, "Oh, who are you watching?" Okay, number 10. Well, I guess number 10 just contacted every single coach that was attending this tournament. So, be pointed with what it is and be realistic. Aim high, but be realistic. And just like I said, take time to just be a person first, okay? And an athlete second.
Great advice from you both, and that you can control. You can control what kind of person you are and how you show up and how you take care of yourself. So I'm grateful for you both, and thank you all for attending Get in the Game. You are both, Sue and Drew, very gracious to spend your time with us. And there'll be a survey at the end if folks want to enter to win a $50 gift certificate from Amazon. You both cannot win, neither can I. I'm sorry, but we really value your feedback, so we can continue bringing you programs that are useful for you and meaningful. So thanks again. Have a great night.